let's continue, and I'll let you continue, Mr. Halley, just now, but I just want to see if I can reach a certain understanding of Mr. Ntlego's evidence on some of the issues we dealt with before lunch. Would you not agree with me, Mr. Ntlego, that speaking in general, or in terms of principle, that it would make sense if the position was that IPID was entitled to give you a second report, if you want to call it that, or another report, if they'd given you or they'd sent out an earlier report on the same subject, but subsequently they took the view that they have made a mistake in regard to some issues in the first report. So speaking at a general level, would you not agree with me that it would make sense if the position was that they were entitled to give you another report reflecting what they considered their final report?
No, thank you very much, Chairperson. I think I tried to deal with this question earlier on by trying to make an example. And the Honorable Chair felt
Did it stop you?
Exactly. No. He felt that I shouldn't. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm being diplomatic, Chair.
Okay. Yes.
I'm trying the most impossible. Okay. Because I was trying to illustrate this point. To say, if you talk of an investigation report is made up of a number of components. You know, it would be statements, it would be many other things and so on. But there could be a circumstance where somebody who has made a statement turns around and says, no, I told a lie. In fact, that thing is not true. So I'm now withdrawing my statement. You know, I said that Mr. So-and-so stole a goat, right? But in an actual fact, I did not see him stealing a goat, and therefore, it's not true.
I thought it was him, but I think it was
someone else. It could be that. Now, that's a material factor, and that material factor is bound to influence your conclusion, right? So, I'm veering away from what Senior Counsel Mkhari referred to as the legal question, entitlement versus not being entitled, and so on. So I'm staying away deliberately from that. But I'm providing this practical example because I'm trying to say that if you were an investigator and certain statements change and people withdraw, that is bound to influence your conclusion. So, from a practical point of view, it does make sense to do so. Then you'll have a different report, which will then also refer to the first report as being changed or annulled for these particular reasons.
Okay, no, that's fine. Well, that is in line with my own sense of what I would expect should be possible, because otherwise, if they were not, as a matter of principle, entitled to give you a revised report or another report reflecting their latest position, you could have a situation where you, as the minister, end up making a decision, for example, that somebody must be subjected to disciplinary hearing on something which is based on something they had already realized was flawed. And actually, I would suggest that if after you have made, if they didn't bring this to your attention by way of saying, look, we made a mistake. This is our view now. We've reflected, blah, 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 blah. And you made a decision. And maybe that decision was challenged and so on successfully. And you got to know that they did realize that they had made a mistake, but they didn't bring this to your attention. It appears to me you would have grounds to be angry with them, to say, why did you let me make a decision on the basis of something you had realized was a mistake? You understand?
Yes, I understand you, Chair.
I think, therefore, what this conversation between you and me reveals is that you and I think that as a matter of common sense, there would be nothing wrong in principle with changing a report or updating it or whatever you call it, if there are certain things that might have happened. It might be that it depends what it is that has happened.
Exactly.
But in principle, we find nothing wrong with the idea of being able to say, I've realized there's something wrong in the first report. This is what I'm now saying.
I can perhaps try and elaborate on this point, Chairperson. Just make one practical example. Suppose I'm writing a report to the United Nations about this commission.
Yes.
There's a difference if in the formulation I say, indeed the commission said, and the chair came in wearing a red suit and white turkeys. That formulation is different from, indeed the commission said, but it had no chairperson. Now, you are likely to arrive at two different conclusions there. The one conclusion is that, yes, the commission had a chair. It's debatable whether the suit that he was wearing was indeed red, and was he wearing turkeys. That's something else. But it's a material factor to then say the chair was not there, but the commission sat and functioned. It then questions also the legitimacy of the structure itself. So it's for me, just to, of course, elaborating on this point and the engagement that, the chair and the honorable chair is having an I think that would be the distinctive kind of factor, really. So I agree with that.
No, I think we are on the same page, because just to make another example, if you, when you were minister, prepared a report and to submit to cabinet, and after you had submitted it, you realized that there was quite some flaw or serious flaws or something like that, you ought to be entitled to replace it with one that you are happy with.
Yes.
That's the principle. Then, of course, in the context of this, and I think Mr. Halley can take it from there, in the context of this, we need to get to the actual alterations.
Okay.
To say, let's go to the so-called alterations and see, one, if there are alterations, or two, what was the basis for different alterations or different recommendations or whatever else was different, and then deal with that. But before we do so, Mr. Halley, may I also put this and hear what you have to say, Mr. Nhleko? As far as recommendations are concerned, insofar as they may have related to criminal conduct, That was for the NPA to decide, is that correct?
Yes, very much so.
That had nothing to do with you in terms of how they decide, but they had to decide that. But insofar as matters of a disciplinary nature were concerned, that fell within your sphere of operation. You had to decide whether somebody needed to be disciplined or not. Is that right?
No, correctly so, Chair.
But am I also correct that you were not bound by the recommendations of IPID in terms of in terms of their recommendations on disciplinary matters? You would have been entitled to look at the material and make up your own mind, disagree with their recommendation if you didn't think it was sound, arrive at your own decision, or is the position that once they had made a recommendation, you didn't have an option, you had to implement their recommendation?
No, I think it should be remembered, Chair, that as an employer, you have both the administrative and institutional duty to uphold the image of the institution. So if, for an example, one of your employees is facing criminal charges out there, let me make specifically that example and so on. From an institutional point of view, something has got to be done about that because there are issues of image, there are issues of repute, there are other issues, of course, related to that and so on. So as an employer, you would also have to look into that without necessarily saying you are pursuing criminal charges, because criminal charges are things that happen out there and so on. And once those matters would have been sorted, you will see how you then deal with that particular matter. So I'm not sure whether that would satisfy, for an example, this issue, because it's a very, it's some sort of a thin divide, if I may put it that way, because criminality is being pursued somewhere else by a reputable institution such as the NPA. But there are issues then about the nature of the employment and the institution that you'll be heading.
Yes, but that wasn't my question. My question is, was your understanding at the time that you were bound by IPID's recommendations as far as disciplinary matters were concerned? Namely, if they made a recommendation that somebody must be disciplined, or they made a recommendation that somebody should not be disciplined, was your understanding that you were bound to implement their recommendations, or was your understanding that you were not bound, this was simply a recommendation, you were entitled to arrive at your own decision, which could be that I disagree with this recommendation, this is what I'm going to do?
I suppose it would really depend on the material factors involved, but recommendations are to be taken seriously. That would be my point of emphasis and so on, and then take it on from there.
Well, let me try this. Would your attitude have been that that you would take IPID's recommendations on disciplinary matters seriously, but you would feel free to depart from them or not to follow them where you felt that they were wrong? I'm trying to see to what extent, what was their place in your decision making?
Yeah, but
because from what you say, we can exclude the possibility that you thought they meant nothing, you could ignore them. That's not what you are saying. You are saying
no, you
they
couldn't.
were to be taken seriously.
You couldn't, yes.
Yes, but I am exploring the possibility whether taking them seriously meant that, as far as you understood the position, you must implement them all the time, irrespective of your view of them, or whether you are saying, I would implement them unless I felt strongly that they were wrong.
Look, I would implement them. I would definitely implement them. But, earlier on I was just thinking about what the Honorable Chair was saying. There is a contradiction between taking something seriously but being free to do something else in the opposite, So, but nevertheless, I would take them seriously and, of course, implement them. Now, any other matter that will arise thereafter, of material value, for an example, will arise out of the process. Yeah. For instance, you could have a situation where a particular ex-employee is being accused of X, Y, and Z. Okay. But then, as and when the disciplinary process is unfolding, it is then discovered that basically this particular human individual is not as guilty as suggested, for lack of a better word, really. So that's why I always stress the question of the process. A disciplinary process, extremely important, and it has to be followed at all material times so that you give an opportunity to an accused person to clear himself or herself, but also put matters out there in the open. If there is exoneration, there is exoneration. If there isn't, there isn't. It's a different matter altogether.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Halley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question of, and we'll return to some of the issues that have been raised by the chairperson at some stage, but for present purposes, I'm trying to understand some of your earlier answers, and I think I do, but there's some disagreement, or might be some disagreement between me and the rest of my team as to what your answer actually is. If I understand correctly, before you decided to refer the matter to Worksman's for their assessment, you had not at that stage actually gone through a process of conducting an analysis between the first report, the second report, and the docket. And I'm speaking about you personally.
No, but we don't have to be individualistic about this. The fact of the matter is that as Minister of Police then, I was heading an institution called Ministry. So you can't have an emphasis on you personally. Did you do this and so on? I mean, the fact of the matter is this. Certain matters were brought to the fore, identified, ideally as they should have been. You put them to a process and you say, establish the facts around this. Now, yeah.
Well, you see, Mr. Ntleko, I know I'm interrupting you while you are in the middle of your answer.
No, you didn't.
Oh, you actually done.
I just stopped there.
You see, as I've said earlier, we'll make better progress if you just answer the question. If the question is, had you yourself personally conducted the analysis, and the answer is you had not, you just say, I had not. And if you want to add, but I had staff who had done so for me, they gave me executive summaries, that's what I had looked at, that's fine. Then we make progress. Okay.
Okay.
From what you have said, it seems to me that you might not have yourself done that analysis, right, but there were staff in your ministry who had done that, and you had the benefit of that. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that in fact correct, sir?
It is correct, sir.
Okay, so you had staff who had conducted the analysis, compared the first report to the second report, and compared both of those against the docket.
Right, correctly so.
And they came to the conclusion of that what had happened. Or let me ask you, what was their conclusion?
No, the conclusion was simple. There was further work that needed to be undertaken insofar as the issue of the two reports.
Okay.
And that's where the issue of I think about the six sort of areas of focus came in to then say, look, these are the matters that would have to be looked into to clarify this question.
When you say areas of focus, are you referring, in fact, to the ultimate questions that were put to workmen to say,
exactly,
investigate these issues?
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a report had been, presumably a report or an executive summary or something had been prepared, which was given to you to consider as the minister, which dealt with the question of whether of the comparison between the two reports and the docket, and suggested to you that there was additional work that needed to be done, and that is one of the reasons why you decided to refer the matter to IPID. Pardon me, to Worksmans.
Right.
Now, if you just bear with me. And the people that had conducted this assessment, are we referring here to the reference group? Are we referring to some legal advisors? Or are we referring to somebody other than either of those two?
It's a combination, really. The reference group did whatever work it would do. It would bring the result of their work, but of course, that's then within the ministry, and we would also sit and go through such reports.
Sorry, the people who compiled the executive summary or a report which pointed out that they had conducted an analysis of the two IPID reports, and they had conducted an analysis of the docket, and they felt that there was additional work to be done. I'm looking for the identity of that person, persons, or body. Now, you say it's a combination. I've suggested the reference group. I've suggested a legal advisor. You say it's a combination. A combination of what? The reference group and a legal advisor?
Yes. I think he's saying that people from different units in the ministry did some work. Well, I don't know if there was a document that ultimately was given to you, a single document, or whether there may have been different documents from different people. Is that something you are able to remember, or is that something you are not able to remember?
It's possible that in certain instances there would be a document, but by and large, we would have a discussion and strategy sessions, for example, to look into reports and various issues. And so on, and then take it, follow it on from there.
Yeah, okay.
Can I, if I might, take you to your affidavit, which is to be found in LEA 1 at page, this is exhibit YA, sorry, Y8A, Mr. Chairperson. And the relevant portion...
Is that his affidavit, right?
That is correct. The relevant portion is at page 28.
Yes, just...
Is it 28 of my affidavit or your
Correct.
28?
Is 28 the paragraph or the page?
28 is the page number, Mr. Chair.
That means it's the red numbers at the top.
Top right-hand corner.
Yes, continue, Mr. Halley.
If we can start, in fact, Mr. Chairperson, on the preceding page, at page 27, at the foot of that page, at paragraph 75. You say that the reference group in dealing with the unlawful rendition of Zimbabwean nationals identified that there was an investigation report by IPID conducted earlier and signed off on the 22nd of January 2012. It also identified that there was another report by IPID soon after Mr. Robert McBride had assumed his assumed function as Executive Director of IPID in March 2012. The predicament with this was that there were now two reports on the same subject matter of the rendition of the Zimbabwean nationals, each report with recommendations that were in contradiction with one another. Save the last recommendation on both reports. The initial report by the reference group on on the following page, at paragraph 76 says, the initial report by the reference group and also pointed out to the seriousness of this matter. The report pointed to the violation of the Extradition Act, the African Union Protocol, and the United Nations Convention, among others. It must also be remembered that the criminal justice cluster was also seized with the matter in 2012, as this matter attracted media and public interest after the expose by the Sunday Times publication. In 2014, when I appeared on SABC Talk channel for the presentation of crime statistics, the show anchor jumped me with a sudden question on the renditions and asked me as to why disciplinary steps were not instituted against senior police officials, such as General Dramart and others, as they were implicated in the said report. I undertook right there and then that I was going to follow up on the said complaint. Given all these matters as they were brought to the fore, you say, I felt the need for more detailed investigation to clarify ourselves on these issues. I then proceeded to appoint worksmen's attorneys to conduct an investigation. Now, there's no mention in this thing about the fact that you had received either an executive summary, a memorandum, or even discussion from anybody, not even from the reference group. The only reference to the reference group over here is about the fact that the reference group had spoken about the Dramart investigation.
Mr. Harvey, I'm very keen for us to get to what the alterations were.
I am too.
Yes, we must try and finish today. This witness was going to testify yesterday, and after that there would have been cross-examination of Mr. McBride.
Yes.
And we took the whole of yesterday. I thought we would finish before lunch. We are now after lunch. We've got to get to the real issues.
What I want to do, with the chair's leave, I want to obviously get into the report, the two reports, and I'll produce the two reports. The thing that I'm anxious about, of course, is that if the witness had not considered or done an assessment of the two reports, then everything he tells us after that is really based upon what the Workson's report has said, as opposed to what he himself had done. So I'm just anxious, but I'll get into the report.
I'm sorry, I think just bring your mic closer. I missed some of the things you are saying. I just want
Pardon me, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
The point I'm making, Mr. Chair, is that I'm anxious to get into the reports, provided that the witness is himself done an assessment of the reports prior to Worksman's. Otherwise, if his assessment is based upon what Worksman's has done or said, then Worksman's are the people that I must speak to, and Mr. July is coming to testify about that. But for this witness, and I understand that the witness has testified that he endorsed or accepted the report, and we'll deal with that in a moment. But at this stage, I'm just anxious to first ascertain the witness's response of whether he himself had done or even been advised on the assessment that had been conducted between the two reports before we get into the reports.
Well, I can understood you earlier on when you asked him about whether he had personally done the analysis that you talked about, but I'm not sure how important that this issue is. He took the view that there was an alteration of a certain report, of the first report, and he took the view that circumstances were such that there should be further investigation. And it seems to me that we are taking long to get into exactly what was different between the two reports. So I think let's get there as soon as possible.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. If you wouldn't mind me just dealing with this one issue, we'll move on to the reports in a moment. So what I'm getting at, Mr. Nhleko, is that in your explanation, in fact, quite a substantial explanation, you've made no mention at all of receiving input from the reference group or from any other body in relation to the analysis that was done between the two reports, other than to identify that there were two different reports.
Honourable Chair, a report is produced by the reference group. They bring it over to me in terms of what it is that they had found. And the report is entitled it's a report to advise the Ministry on good governance procedures and intergovernmental protocols. Excuse me, I need some water. My apologies, Chair.
There should always be water next to the witness.
I meant pure water. Honourable Chair. So the report is titled.
What other water can that be?
My apologies.
Are you thinking of isiZulu? Because in isiZulu, there is water that is described in a certain way.
I know the Chair. I do.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yes,
that's not what you mean.
No, that's not what I mean.
Okay, I think somebody will bring you water. We can continue in the meantime.
We can proceed in the meantime. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Chair. So the report by the reference group is titled, it's a report to advise the Ministry on good governance procedures and intergovernmental protocols, national legislation, and the legality of the deportation of the Zimbabwean nationals by DPCI. So, thank you very much, sir. So, in their report, they go into a number of issues.
Sorry, is there something for the witness to sanitize the bottle with or not? I think somebody must just sanitize. I don't want the witness to later complain that he came to the commission free of COVID and he left the commission with COVID.
I'm very blessed that my bottle has been sanitized by a reverend, a priest.
It's blessed water, Mr. Nhleko.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
No. So that's what the report says. But in the briefing, they then point out, they say, look, there are these issues of the question of the two reports that needs to be looked into. And I think earlier on we've spoken to the entire process in terms of what transpired then, the communication between myself and Mr. McKnight and so on, around these particular matters. Now, and by the way, as a matter of principle, from a corporate governance point of view, I disagree with the position that Mr. Hali seems to be advancing. There's no way that Vexman would have commissioned themselves. There's no way. They did not activate themselves. The actual trigger was myself as the minister there. Now, they were doing that work on behalf of the Minister of Police as per the identified terms of reference. So we shouldn't create an impression that when we refer to a Vexman's report is because we're talking a vexman's report that just out of their own volition, they just went into the ministry portfolio of police and just did this kind of work and so on. Now, I'm referring to principles of corporate governance because I think in there, the fact is that you then, as the principal in the institution, you take ownership of that report and the recommendations, and you take it on from that point of view. So, correctly so, Honourable Chair, I am of the view, and I fully agree with this position that says, let us then look into what is this work that was done in relation to the question of the two reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, Mr. Hali, if you don't get into that, Mr. Ntleko is going to start believing that you are running away from dealing with that, because I think earlier in the morning he made a suggestion that he wants us to go into that report and you are not getting there.
If we can get to just to the terms of reference which appear.
Well, before you get to the terms of reference, Mr. Hali, let me deal with this. Mr. Ntleko, now the one thing that we know is that in the second report, with regard to General Dramat, and General Sibiya, I'm not sure.
Yes,
the recommendation was that there should be no criminal prosecution, there should be no disciplinary action. Is that right?
Yes,
that's
what was said.
But in the first report, the recommendation included that they should be charged criminally and there should be disciplinary action with regard to them.
Correct,
as well.
Yes.
And others. Yeah. Now, on its own, based on my previous interaction with you earlier on, I take it that on its own, that should not be a problem in terms of a general principle. So, what may have made you think that there might be something untoward here, there is something that needs further investigation, might well be what else was changed, if you call it changed. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
With us going into the report or without us going to the report, are you able to say, look, for example, for me, in regard to the first report, this is what they had said, but in the second report, that was no longer there. That seemed to be quite important to me. I'm saying you can deal with that without going to the report if you are able to, but if you want to go into the report and say, 1, 2, 3, here are the things that worried me about this.
Honourable Chair, I would venture to say that we would have to zoom straight into the table that we have provided, because the table that we have provided then tells you this is what was said in this particular report, and this is what appeared to be an alteration at this other end, and so on.
Shall we go there, Mr. Hali, and then please don't forget the question you wanted to ask. I just want us to cross this river at this stage.
We've got to go to bundle Y8A. Sorry, pardon me, Mr. James. It's LEA now. 1.
Bundle?
Actually, we do have, it depends, we do in his own affidavit, He has put a table, unless if you want to refer to something else.
In his own affidavit?
In his own affidavit.
Yeah, what page?
That's at page.
Yeah, I thought I'd seen it in his affidavit too.
Yes, it's page 50.
The red numbers?
The red number at the top.
50, okay, yes.
It's like 0050.
Thank you, Mr. Mukari.
That's where it starts, paragraph 150.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. At page 50, the heading there says deletion of evidence from the first report. And then on the left column, it's IPID report 1. On the second column, it's IPID report 2.
In reference to that, Chair, meaning IPID report 1 is 22 January?
Yes.
And IPID report 2
is
being
18
March?
Yes. That's my understanding. Mr. Harley, do you want to
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
take that and run with it?
If I understand correctly, so what you've done over here is you've basically cut from the report of Worksman's and you've pasted it into your affidavit. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's correct, Honourable Chair.
And there's been no, you haven't added or deleted from the Worksman's report or their assessment. In other words, you've accepted it lock, stock, and barrel.
No, I haven't deleted anything.
Okay. So let's consider it at the top of page 51. On page 50, you start with the analysis, but there's no analysis that appears on page 50. Page 51 is where the analysis begins. Would you like to take us through it?
No, thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson. What I will attempt to do, I would deal with a column on the first report, and then take that laterally across to the second report.
Yes.
On the first column, the first report, the report of the 22nd January, on page 9, which is a statement by, I think, a colonel at the time, Ndanduleni Richard Matilonga. Matilonga states as follows in the relevant paragraphs. Superintendent Ncube told him that he was going to Pretoria to meet General Dramat. He said to him that maybe he knew about the chief superintendent who had been murdered. He said that the suspects were in Gauteng, and he had organized with General Dramat to assist them in tracing suspects, close quote. That paragraph stays the same on the second report. The second paragraph in the first report then goes on. It says, he will state that he told Superintendent Ncube that he has to verify with his seniors about the arrangements. He was given a number of General Dramat by Superintendent Ncube. He called Colonel Ratsilani to verify the information, but she requested that he should call Brigadier Magushu, who was the provincial head protection and security services. He then called him on his cell phone and explained to him that there are police from Zimbabwe who are intending to have a meeting with General Dramat. Brigadier Magushu told him that he was not aware of the visit, but if the people are saying that they are going to meet the general, he should call General Dramat directly. He phoned General Dramat on his cell phone, and he responded by saying that he is aware of the Zimbabwean police and he must let them come, close quote. That's Colonel Matilonga on report 1. Now on report 2, on report 2, Chairperson, the paragraph that follows the above, in other words, the above is the first paragraph as we had stated, has been deleted. It's then replaced by the following words in there. For the period of 2 weeks, he never had anything from Superintendent Ncube and his group. After 2 weeks, he received a call from Superintendent Ncube, who told him that he was in town and he wanted to say goodbye. He went to town and met with them in front of Top's bottle store. They bought liquor and they left to the border. He did not escort them. They went to the border and crossed to Zimbabwe. So effectively, the paragraph in the statement by Colonel Madilonga, which starts with, he will state, that paragraph in its entirety is deleted and replaced by what I've just read out. Now, at page 21, paragraph 5.2, which reads, success report dated the 4th of February 2011. This report is addressed.
I'm sorry. Are you now at page 53? What page are you?
It's the following page from where I started off.
Yeah, we started at page 51, and then...
What's your...
It's 53, Mr. Chairperson. You've got to look at the top right-hand corner.
No, part of the problem, Chair, it's my apologies. The file in question, I think they are looking it up for me. I'm using my statement.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So the statement is outside of your pagination, if I may put it that way.
Okay.
So maybe for purposes of clarifying that question, I'm trying to get the file.
Somebody given the witness the file, the witness must have the same file that we have. Each time I'm given a file, he must be given a file. They'll give it to you. They will give it to you just now.
Yes, but very good to me, Chairman. I must state, he's the only person that organized me a cup of coffee during lunch at this commission. I mean,
so this commission is not so bad, eh?
I suppose certain members of the commission.
and I suspect the chairperson might not be one of them.
And
yes.
By the way, Mr. Halley also, I mean, really, I got a chicken and a mayo sandwich yesterday. Thank you. What page is it?
Well, the columns start at page 50, but the actual paragraphs start at page 51.
Oh, of my statement, sorry.
Of your statement, yeah. But when I say 50 and 51, I'm talking about the red numbers at the top corner of each page.
Okay. So I've already dealt with page 51.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've already dealt with page 51. So basically, I went over to page 52.
Yeah, you read 52 as well.
Right. So I'm now on page 53 of that file. Yes.
But before you proceed, I just want to get this because I didn't get a chance to check it. When you talk about alteration of certain paragraphs, you're not talking about alteration of the actual statements of witnesses, but you're talking about alteration of the IPID's reports based on what the statements of witnesses say. Is that right? In other words, if in Madilonga, for example, when we talk about a change of certain paragraphs, we're not talking about saying he had signed a statement which said A, B, C, D.
Right.
somebody at IPID went to that statement and removed a paragraph and put in another paragraph in a statement that had been signed. You are simply saying that in IPID's report, where they refer to Mr. Matilonga, this is what they said, and then in the first report. But in the second report, they put in something else in the report, not in the statement.
Yes, my understanding is exactly that. The statements were contained, I think, in the docket.
Yes.
Signed as they were, but in the reports, in the production of the report and/or reports.
Yes.
Then we have these particular direct sort of extracts from the statements.
Yes. Okay. No, I just wanted us to be clear. I think we're on the same page then.
Okay.
Thank
you
continue.
very much.
Yeah. Continue.
So, paragraph 21, paragraph 5.2 reads the success report dated the 4th of February 2011. This report is addressed to Dramat, Hlanjwayo, and Doka. The relevant paragraph of the success report reads as follows, and I quote this paragraph. The report bears reference 1402/01 and was signed by Colonel Leonie Feste. Paragraph A1 of the report states that on the 5th of November 2010, General Dramat held a meeting with Zimbabwean police at DPCI offices about the nationals who shot and killed one of their senior officers. Paragraph 3 states that Captain Maluleke was tasked to trace and arrest the said nationals. The report also covers the arrest of Gordon Ngube and appreciation of TRT members and members of crime intelligence, close quote. That paragraph in the second report is deleted, and the paragraph beginning with the report bears reference 1402/01 from the first report is deleted in the second report.
Now,
at paragraph 21.
Yes, before you go to paragraph 21, Mr. Ntego, I just want to put this question before we move on, because it might affect how I look at the rest of the matters in the columns. If the position was that the statements of the witnesses with regard to the rendition matter were provided to you, and they were in the docket. And then there was the report, which was supposed to be based on those statements.
Right.
I would take it that you would not have made any decision in regard to the disciplinary matters without looking at the actual statements themselves. When I say without looking at them, it may be that you would not personally look at them, but if you were not going to personally look at them, I would imagine that you'd get somebody within the ministry to look at them and maybe give you an executive summary or something. Am I right in thinking along those lines? That you would not make a decision, for example, that somebody must be suspended purely on the basis of the IPID report without going into the statements themselves.
But this teacher, I think I may have a little bit of a disagreement with you around that. maybe a different understanding altogether, I don't know. But the point is, that's why I had to commission, for an example, Vexman to then say, do some detailed work, and of course on the basis of which they had to also, there was no way that they would deal with this kind of work without, for an example, having the two reports, but also far and above that, the question of the docket and the relevant information.
Okay, let me put it this way. My understanding is that your concern,
yes, sir,
at some stage, possibly maybe before you referred the matter to Workmen's, your concern was that there may have been an attempt on the part of one or more people at IPID to prevent you taking disciplinary action against General Dramat and maybe General Sbiya, or to prevent the NPA from coming to a decision that General Dramat and General Sbiya should be prosecuted. And that's why there was this so-called alteration to move away from a recommendation that said they should be charged criminally, they should be charged in terms of departmentally, to a position where the second report said they should not be charged criminally, they should not be disciplined. So my understanding is that you were concerned that there may well have been that intent on the part of somebody, one or more people at IPID, and that's part of the reason why you wanted this to be investigated. Is my understanding correct?
No, that's correct, Chair.
That's correct. Now, for me, the question that arises is if the statements of the witnesses, including Matilonga in this case, which are really the instruments that have the evidence, if they have the evidence that somebody must be charged, those are the documents that contain the evidence. If there is no evidence that somebody be charged, those are the documents that don't have. Now, I wonder why it could be thought that somebody at IPID, by changing something in their report without the actual documents that contain the evidence being changed, why it was thought that somebody could be trying maybe to defeat the ends of justice or something like that, when the actual statements remain the same. Because I would have thought that even though the report is there, the decision makers, whether it was yourself in regard to disciplinary matters or the NPA in regard to criminal matters, I don't see them making a decision without looking at the statements. And IPID, I would imagine, would have understood that, that we've got our report, but the decisions can't be taken just on the basis of our report only. The decision makers will look at the actual statements as well. And therefore, if they look at the statements, they will see the true evidence of what it says. And if there is a a conflict between the statements and the report, they will rely on the statements because the compilers of the report were not witnesses to the events, to the incidents. The actual witnesses are the people who signed the statements.
Mm. No, I hear you, Honorable Chairperson. I'm certain that maybe at a particular point I did not maybe look at it that way. Mm. But remember that what we have just said still doesn't necessarily resolve the issue. The issue would still be, if in the original file you still have the original statements that say something else, why then in your report, which then accompanies a particular file, the articulation is different from your statements? It will still raise that very same issue. It wouldn't necessarily take it away.
Well, it might change. It might change the way one looks at it. Somebody might give me a wrong summary of a certain document. So I read the summary and then I go to the document. When I read the document, I realize that they've made some mistakes. It's not accurate. But if I have access to both, I'll tell them, you know, this summary of yours is flawed. This is not what's in the report, and I might leave it at that, or I might say, well, maybe next time I'm not going to rely on your summary because it looks like you can't give me a summary that I can rely on. But it's different, it seems to me, if all I'm going to have is his summary. But if I'm going to have available to me the statements as well, and I am expected to read them before I make the decision, I will pick up that there is some inaccuracies on his summary, but then once I've picked that up, I will rely on the statements and not on his report. Actually, I can throw it away and rely on the statements.
No, again, I hear you, Chair, and appreciate that. Except that that's much more simpler. Suppose in your office you have a report writer. So your report writer deletes information that is brought to you. Okay? You are bound to react far stronger than you have suggested. To then say, but this summary of yours is not okay, whatever, adjust this, that, here and there, and so on. You are bound to ask a different question, and the question would be, why did you delete this information? You see, so I'm then saying it will still require you to demand accountability around that issue. Because then there's the element of the pollution of facts, amongst other things. And it would, if that was somewhat allowed to happen, let's say you are provided with that summary with deleted information, it would mislead you as the principal. I'm just making an example. So much as I hear the example that you just spoke to, I think it's a much simpler a kind of an example as opposed to the kind of matter that we're dealing with here.
No, I'm quite happy that we look at that, but maybe it's good that you put it that way to say maybe my example is simpler, because part of what I'm trying to understand is why is it that something that on the face of this appears or may appear to have been a simple thing, why did it end up being such a big, almost national issue? You know, this thing about these reports. So it's part of what I'm trying to understand, and that's part of the reason why I put these questions so that I can get your own perspective to say, this is how I looked at it. When I saw this, this is what it said to me.
Right.
And as a result of that, because this is what it said to me, this is the decision I made, and this is how I dealt with it. So it's part of trying to look at that. But I interrupted while you were comparing simply because I wanted to get this understanding from you, which I have got.
But let me just add quickly, to then say perhaps also when we deal with this section and deal with the process as well, beyond just the question of the two columns, I think most of the things will also become clearer.
Yeah.
As and when we proceed.
No, let's proceed.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Paragraph 21, at paragraph 5.3, emails by Captain Malulek. The email quoted states the following, I quote, "He sent emails circulating more than 20 photos of both the suspects arrested and the members involved in the operation. The emails were sent to the PA of Adjournment, Zimbabwe Police, and members of crime intelligence," close quote. That's what the first report says. The same paragraph in the so-called second report does not mention all the individuals to which the emails were sent to. Rather, it reads, "He sent emails circulating more than 20 photos of both the suspects arrested and the members involved in the operation. He sent email to the Zimbabwean police trying to find out how they traveled back home, and that he is still tracing the remaining suspects." So, same paragraph, but two different contexts. Okay? On page 22 of the first report, the letter to stakeholders dated the 20th.
I'm sorry, before we go to paragraph 22, I think what you have just read related to paragraph 21, is that right?
Yes, that's on page 21, paragraph 5.3.
Yes.
Of the first report.
Page 21. If you take what was said in the first report there, page 21, about Mr. Malulek, and what was said there in the second report, on the understanding that what was said in the first report was specific in terms of who exactly the emails were sent to. Okay, well, maybe I should say what the second report doesn't say. It doesn't make a reference to say. It doesn't say the emails were sent to the PA of Adjournment, Pumla.
Right.
The second report says he sent emails to Zimbabwean police. So it leaves out members of the crime intelligence and Mr. Adjournment's PA, which are specifically mentioned in the first report. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The difference between
That's correct. That's a difference.
Now, is it not true that any decision maker who, having read the second report and even being aware of the first report maybe, at the time of reading the statements before making the decision, he or she would come across exactly the same information?
I think it takes us back to the point you raised earlier on, isn't it, Chair?
Yes, it does. I'm trying to connect. Yes. But I think your answer would be yes, he would come across the same information in the statements.
You mean in the original statements? I think that was your point earlier on, to then say
yes.
You have the pack of original statements somewhere, but in the production of the report.
Yes. Yeah, I'm talking about what you call original statements. I don't want to call them original statements because it may give the impression that there are other unoriginal statements. So I'm just saying statements.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm suggesting to you is that even though in the second report on page 21, it is not stated that he sent emails to Mr. Dramat's PA and members of the crime intelligence. It is only said he sent emails to the Zimbabwean police. The decision maker, whether it's NPA or yourself, who would read the statements would come across the same information, namely that emails were sent to the PA of Mr. Dramat as well as to members of the crime intelligence. That's the suggestion.
No, I hear your point. Yes. Safe to say that you still remain with the question. Why is that matter put differently in the
yes.
other?
Yeah, I accept that. But we are on the same page that the authors of the second report would know that anyone who took care to read the statements would actually get the full picture before making the decision.
Okay.
Is that right?
No, I hear you.
Yeah, okay.
Chair, perhaps if I can just explore some of that, because I was going to leave it until the end, but if I could explore some aspects of that just very briefly. What we understand from your testimony thus far, Mr. Nhleko, is that the 22 January report read in a particular way, which was different from the 18 March report. The 22 January report itself, nothing was deleted from that report. It still remained in existence. The 18 March report had words that were similar to the 22 January report, but some words had been removed, other words had been added, and the recommendation was different. So you've got two reports, not one report with words deleted from the report, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Now,
getting it right.
And the 18 March report doesn't purport to be the 22 January report, does it? In other words, it doesn't say that it's on the report itself. It's not written 22 January. It's written 18 March.
No, I'm losing you there. I mean, you seem now to be suggesting that.
Does that question take us back to the question whether we should be talking about two reports or one report?
Exactly. That's the point.
Well, it may be important, but I just wanted to make sure that that's where it takes us to.
And I would still suggest, the Honourable Chair, that look, let us deal with this particular inconsistencies.
No, we will.
Yes,
Yeah.
And then of course we will come to the actual debate and discussion on these issues.
No,
and of course,
that's fine. Yeah.
And of course, I think, for instance, as and when I've been proceeding, I hear certain articulations from the side of the chair and so on.
Yeah.
And of course, I may agree, I may not agree with them and so on.
But
they will be part of further engagement and so on. Yes.
Yeah, it's as I see it, my approach is certainly from my side, I'm trying to get clarifications.
Okay.
Because I want to be able to see if I can see the matter from the angle of the IPID witnesses, and then also look at it from your side as minister in charge of police. So therefore, these clarifications. But I think let us go through, maybe the sooner we finalize what the alterations were, the better, and then we can come back and deal with issues arising from that.
No, thank you very much, Honourable Chair. On page 22, a letter to stakeholders dated the 20th of August 2012, the letter states thus, quote, Letter to stakeholders dated 20th August 2012. The letter was generated the same day, indicating that in August 2010, General Spear and General Dramat went to Zimbabwe to discuss matters of cooperation on cross-border crimes. General Spear was appointed as the coordinator on the cooperation issue between the two countries. Other letters about the arrests of Zimbabwean national in connection with the murder of Zimbabwean police refers to the cooperation agreed during the same meeting. Now, on what is paginated as page 21 on the second report, and in this report, the names of the people involved in the cooperation with the Zimbabwean police are no longer mentioned. The letter reads thus in the report. Same title, letter to stakeholders dated 20th August 2012. The letter was generated the same day, I quote, the letter was generated the same day indicating the trip to Zimbabwe to discuss matters of cooperation on cross-border crimes, close quote. That's how that now in the second report, that paragraph looks like.
Yes.
Okay.
Before we proceed, I think if in regard to a particular alteration, there is something that we need to deal with, let's deal with as we go along. Because maybe if we wait until the end, it might be difficult. But then we just deal with it. Let me just say to you, Mr. Ntlego, on the face of it, it seems to me, I mean, in the first report, you have quite a detailed paragraph or portion, whereas in the second one, in the second report, you just have one sentence, which could mean that somebody decided, why do you have to put in all these details? Try and condense your report for argument's sake. Try and condense your report. I mean, some people are quite particular, and I guess in this case, remember that the first report, as I understand the position, Mr. Kuba had done it without, if I recall correctly, without any input from Mr. Sissoko. I may be mistaken, but certainly without any input, I think, from Mr. McBride, because Mr. McBride had not arrived at IPID yet. And then the second report, it appears that all three of them got involved. So I'm just mentioning what's going on in my mind. You might wish to say something about that.
Chair,
No, Chair.
Sorry, Chair,
sorry,
maybe before you respond.
Yes.
I was just scrolling down this. I see that it's very long. It's a very long table.
So you suggest that we go through it.
Yeah, if he's going to go through it, the whole of it. I just want to find out from the evidence leaders. If the position, because when I look at the report, the table, the first report and the second report.
Yeah.
What is there is that the second report, where in the first report there was reference to General Dramat and Sevilla. Yeah. The second report removes them.
Yes.
So it doesn't refer to them.
Yes.
So if the evidence leaders agree that first,
yes,
then the first report and the second report are identical.
Yes.
Except that the second report has, in certain instances where there is reference to Dramat and Sevilla, they removed that part. Yeah. And if then that is accepted, because there's a table that comes from the report of Worksmans, then there is no need for Mr. Ntlego then to go through. The issue then will be really at the end as to why Dramat and Sevilla's names were removed. Yes. And whether that constituted misconduct or not.
Yes. No, I think it links with a question that I'd asked earlier, but I think we had some discussion, Mr. Nhlego and I, and ended up not going back to it. What I had sought to ask was, in terms of the alterations, what really did you regard as important? You know, you say one, and you say A, B, C. That's what was important. There may have been other alterations, but they were, in my view, neither here nor there. This is what was of concern to me. Now, it may be that it's exactly what Mr. Mukhari is saying. It may be that it's something else. If you say, look, every reference to General Dramat, which had been in the first report, from a certain page to a certain page, was removed. That is what was of concern to me. Then we can deal with that, and I think there may be merit in what Mr. Mukhari is saying, to say there may be no need to go through everything if you are able to capture what was of concern to you on the alterations.
No, thanks, Chair. I'll do just 4 areas, if not 5, somewhere there, just so that I illustrate this point. In the first report, now let's go to page, to page 60, I think, of Mr. Ntlego's statement.
60. Yeah.
Okay. Now, in the first report, I'm not sure whether the chair is following.
You're at the bottom part of page 60, where it says Kuba's findings on Dramat.
No, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Page 29. An analysis and findings of Dramat's cell phone records is recorded by Kuma as such. He says, that is Kuma, these are his words. Evaluation of the above findings. In the entire cell phone records of Lieutenant General Dramat, requested for the period of the 20th October 2010 to 28th February 2011, the number 015-534-6300 only appears once, which rules out any form of communication before the 4th of November 2010 and after the said date. This supports his version that he called Lieutenant General Dramat in connection with the Zimbabwean police. In the second report, on the same issue of Kuba's findings on Dramat, there's a complete deletion there. Nothing is said. Okay, that's one example.
Yeah.
The second example, on the issue of the operation, Kuba makes the following findings in this respect. In his words, evaluation of the above findings, the success report signed by Leonie Feste was traced to Lieutenant Colonel Malulega's laptop as picked from the retrieved deleted data. The report was amended on 26 January 2011, and what appears to be, that's me saying, 31st January 2011, before it could be emailed to a female officer, Warrant Officer Thabiso Mafatla, on the 9th of February 2011 at 1400 hours 32 minutes. There is no material difference between the document retrieved from the laptop and that found at the Hawks offices during investigation. This proves that Leonie Fester did not generate success report, but only signed the report drafted by Captain Malulega the date of the meeting between Zimbabwean police and General Dramat, which took place on the 5th of November 2010, coincide with the date on the 4th of November 2010, which according to cell phone records, General Dramat was called at 2000 hours 56 minutes by Lieutenant Colonel Madilonga seeking permission to allow Zimbabwean police officers to enter into the country. Since the Zimbabwean police were at Bait Bridge between 2000 hours and 2100 hours, it is logical that they arrived in Gauteng late at night, leaving them with the opportunity to have the meeting with General Dramat in the morning of the 5th of November 2010, as stated in the success report. Now, in the second report, absolutely nothing is said about that. The third area, the first report of the 22nd January deals with the committed government resources into the operation. Kuba makes the following finding.
I'm sorry, are you at 62? Right?
Yes,
at 62.
No, it's 61, the Honorable
61.
Chair. Yeah,
Okay.
it's, no, 62, sorry,
62,
yes.
yeah.
The one on top, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So it's difficult to follow lawyers' things.
Yes.
Yes. The committed government resources into the operation. Now, Kuba makes the following finding. I quote, despite the fact that General Dramat, as an accounting officer, did not sign any claim of Captain Maluleke delegating responsibility to Major General Sibiya to assist the Zimbabwean police in tracing wanted suspects, invariably commit government resources into an unlawful operation that amount to a criminal offense. Full stop, close quote. Now, in the second report, nothing is said of this very same paragraph. So there's a complete deletion there. Mm-hmm. Now, congratulating, in the first report, there is a heading that says, congratulating the officers for the arrest of John Nyoni. Kuba makes the following finding in this regard. I quote, evaluation of the above findings, words of appreciation from General Dramat show both interest in the arrest of the Zimbabwean nationals and his knowledge of the operation. If the operation was lawful, he would not have warned them not to tell anyone about it, close quote. Now, the same heading in the second report, nothing is said completely about this particular matter. So there's a complete deletion there. On the heading titled, he received communication regarding success reports and photos of the operation through his personal assistant, Pumla. The investigator makes the following point, Mr. Kuba. According to the information received from the seized laptop, Captain Maluleke sent emails circulating more than 20 photos of both the suspects arrested and the members involved in the operation. The emails were sent to the PA of General Dramat, Pumla, Zimbabwean police, and members of crime intelligence. Corresponding to the second report, nothing is said about this particular matter. So there's a complete deletion. So, of course, there's the whole range of other deletions, but I think following the understanding between the Honorable Chair and the Senior Counsel, Mukari, is that you don't want me to bore you with this. But I've made 4 examples of the deletion.
Yeah.
And that's why then, Chair, my issue was, if you come across something like this, what do you do? Now, if I were to say to you, make a decision, and I think this is the point I said earlier on, to say, look, there are no cosmetic grammatical kind of changes that we're dealing with here. We're dealing with material. So surely the complete deletion of a particular paragraph and or statement, for an example, in a report that you would have to decide, let's say as a prosecuting authority, for an example, it would certainly influence the kind of position that you would have to take. And that's why I was saying earlier on, making this example, that if I'm writing a report to the United Nations about this commission, it's of material value whether the chair was sitting presiding over the proceedings of this commission. And that's different from, yes, the chair was there, but he was wearing red glasses. I don't know why I like red and yeah. But I'm just saying there's a material difference in that. So, and this is what we should essentially be concerned about. as to why you have this kind of a situation.
You see, what is the message that these so-called deletions gave you? Or what is the message that these deletions gave you? What did you make of this?
Oh.
Because that must be what informed your next action.
Okay.
I told you, I think, earlier or yesterday or today, that my inclination would have been to call the executive director and say, please explain to me what this is all about. But maybe before I do that, I would look at the statements. And if the statements were intact, then whatever I did with this may have been based on saying, do I think that it was a wrong analysis of the statements, wrong analysis of the issues that may have led to a wrong recommendation? Or do I think it's something else? So what did you make of it? Did you think it may be just some innocuous deletion, or did you think there's something behind it? And if so, did you think that after looking at the statements or without looking at the statements themselves?
Look, sorry, Chair. Look, the way I viewed this, that these are serious acts of misconduct, total deletions, right? Now, you are bound to develop, some theoretical framework, for an example, in your mind. That firstly and foremost, there's something untoward about something like this when you come across an analysis of this nature. But also you're bound to also conclude that it's possible that there was a cover-up of sorts. Now, as to why there would be that cover-up, it's a different process that would have to then establish that. You only remain at the level of being suspicious that there's something wrong here. Now, and that's why, Chair, for me, I think I am on record at different sort of platforms, for an example. Because I said, look, there has got to be accountability about something like this. So that also the people implicated themselves are able to either clear their names and or whatever differently, but you need an objective process to handle something like that. It cannot even be a person like myself, regardless of whatever experience that I think I might have around matters of this nature and so on, but objectively take it out somewhere, get professional and objective people to deal with the matters of this particular nature and so on, so that we will have to get to the bottom of what actually happened and why. Now, I would possibly disclose briefly one of my discussions when the issue of, for an example, General Dramat, who then said in his first letter to me, and subsequently in further engagements, and said he wanted us to sit down and discuss about his options in terms of, leaving the service and so on. So, at one particular point, we met in my office. I think it must have been down in Cape Town now, and we spoke about this very same sort of matter and so on. And I said to him, look, I don't have an interest in you necessarily leaving the service. I have an interest in knowing, of course, through the correct processes in terms of what happened. And of course, as you would appreciate, Chair, you can't tell an employee whether to remain and stay behind or leave. I mean, it's not your call. It's an individual choice that a person makes. So, because I was trying to say to him, and perhaps to anybody else who cares to hear this thing, that you can't have an institution or institutions of governance that function, and anything that happens and seems to be untoward and so on, and there's no accountability. And when you want accountability around some of those issues, and by the way, issues of accountability, it cuts both ways. If I do something wrong, I expect to be corrected, for an example, and be subjected to processes of our law, processes of our instruments within the institutions and so on. Now, that's my natural expectation around these particular matters. But I think there has been this peddling of a view that says you don't like certain people and you want to get rid of them, at all costs and so on, which is absolutely not true. For me, it was just a simpler exercise. These are the allegations that are out there, that you tampered with the report. Here's a legal process that has got to deal with matters of that nature. Go and clear yourself, your name there. That's it.
Well, I'm happy we have come to this point because I think it's quite an important point. You say you thought to yourself that this could be an attempt to cover up. Okay? Is that right? That there was a possibility.
Yes, suspicions in that regard.
Suspicion, yes. Now, I go back to this question, and maybe you did answer it, but whether at the time of doing of having that suspicion, whether you were aware that the statements in the docket had all the information, for example, that may have been in the first report but was no longer in the second report. Were you aware of that, or were you not aware of that at that time?
No, at that time, of course, I wasn't aware.
You were not aware.
But I think also on this issue, and I'm happy that Mr. Sandile Junai of Vexman will also be appearing.
Yes.
Because he would shed more light.
Yes.
On the nitty-gritties of the work that they did.
Yes.
And of course, what is it that they found, for an example, in the docket that they looked into and the statements that were there? It does that, whether or not did those statements tally with the final product as found in the in the two reports, for an example.
Yes. What would you say to the proposition that it would be a very weak attempt on the part of anybody at IPID to try and cover up what General Dramat and General Spear may have done wrong by changing what was in their first report without changing the actual statements on the basis of which decisions would be made. What would you say to that?
Whether or not I would think that's a weak attempt.
Sorry?
Whether or not I would think of that as a weak attempt.
Yes, to say these people must be knowing what they are doing, and they must have known nobody was going to make a decision without reading the statements. And it doesn't help to change something in the report if in the statement it remains there. Because the person will make decision, will look at the statements, and will see all the information that you are trying to remove, if that's your attempt.
No, I would. I think I would share, more or less a similar view, Chairperson. That, if there is something that, for argument's sake, you wanted to manipulate, you needed to manipulate the entire line all the way back, for an example. And that's why I'm also going back to the point that says, I'm happy that Mr. July would appear here, because then we will also be looking into the process issues. And some of the process issues, they also affect the National Prosecuting Authority and so forth. There was the whole question, for instance, of the docket itself being withdrawn from the National Prosecuting Authority for whatever the reasons were, and so on. And there is quite a bit of few individuals involved there, not on the side of IPID, but of course the National Prosecuting Authority, and so it goes. Now that is dealt with in detail in the report that I had to commission for this, in the work that I had to commission as the Waxman investigation. But I appreciate and understand the viewpoint by the chair. You are right that naturally you do come to this question, but how is it possible that this thing can be done only at this level and not the entire value chain of sorts and so on? But I think as and when we engage further with it, we'll get more clarity. Chair.
No, that's fine. And of course, part of what one would look at is these are not just people who have no investigative experience. These are people who have got quite some experience of investigating, and they would know exactly what to do if they wanted to do this. But that doesn't mean the alterations must not be looked at. I'm just putting this, Mr. Halley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I understand you correctly, what you said is that insofar as the additional investigations were that were conducted, you would prefer Mr. July to speak to that?
No, Mr. Halley, I think let's try and clarify this. We are talking about additional investigation. Now, I need to be careful about that, because there has been reference to additional investigations, but relating to the question of the
I think let's say
reports.
Workman's investigation.
The Workman's investigation.
Okay.
So as far as the investigations conducted by Workman's is concerned, you'd prefer Mr. July to speak to that?
No, not necessarily.
Yes.
Not necessarily. Look, I prepared a statement.
Yes.
And I came here, Honourable Chair, in the first day, and you looked at me and in a very intimidating kind of manner and said, "You are not going to present this thing word for word right throughout." Okay, but it's there. Of course, I'm exaggerating what I've just said, Chair. So I'm sorry, I'm saying it in jest. Now.
No, I think I understand what you're saying about Mr. July. You were simply saying you are happy that you are giving your own understanding of issues, your own perspective.
Yes.
And that the person that you asked to investigate will also come and give his own understanding
Yes.
and his perspective.
Yes.
That's what you are saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
And particularly because he also he conducted interviews and, face-to-face kind of interviews and interactions with people.
Yes.
He will be able to elucidate more points about what that experience entailed and so on. Yes.
No, and of course, as we ask you questions, we will bear in mind that you are not responsible for his decisions, except insofar as you adopted them. But you are responsible for your own decisions. And obviously, if you decide to adopt, you might be asked. But I think it's clear you are saying you are giving your perspective. He will come and give me his perspective as well. Yeah. Mr. Halley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Could I'm sorry, Chair.
Yes. Washing of hands.
Washing of hands, please. I'm sorry, Mr. Halley.
Okay, we are going to have... I think I've got an idea that after close to 2 hours, there should be a break to wash hands.
Thank you very much. Yes.
So we are at 3:45. Maybe before, or maybe let's have the washing of hands. Then when we come back, we can talk about the way forward.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll adjourn for 10 minutes. Is that fine? Or should it be 15?
No, that's fine. I mean, no, that's more than
fine.
sufficient.
We'll adjourn for 10 minutes.
Yeah,
we
thank
adjourn.
No, I'm sorry to do this to you because
Okay, let's talk about the way forward. I see counsel for, he has just arrived. Let's talk about the way forward. We obviously haven't finished. Well, let me start with the witness, Mr. Nhlego. What is your situation? I imagine, but you must just tell me what your situation is. I imagine that maybe we should look at, because you are still going to come back when Mr. McBride is to be cross-examined. One option would be that we plan that when you come back, you finish off your part and then your counsel cross-examines him. Another option is that we proceed for another hour or so, but I doubt that we'll finish within that hour. I'm not sure if there's another option, but what is your situation?
Honorable Chair, I initially had thought that we're going to finish yesterday, but we then have now gravitated to where we are.
Yes.
But this is a matter of priority.
Yes.
So as a result of which, I think there would be something wrong if we don't finish tomorrow. I'm just making an example.
Oh, yes.
There will be something fundamentally wrong.
If we go into tomorrow, we will finish tomorrow.
Yes, so I'm suggesting that in any case, I'm stuck around this place that I don't like.
Okay.
So I'm looking at the...
You're looking at your senior counsel.
Because
I will be asking him just now what his position is. But from your side,
that's my position.
Even tomorrow, you are still available.
Even tomorrow, yes, we can.
So we could go on for some time this afternoon, and if we still haven't finished, then continue tomorrow until we finish, if we can, with you. I know there are other matters, but I think that we should be able to finish with you, even with those matters. I think that they might have to be moved, just like you have been moved in terms of. Okay, all right, Mr. Mukari, what is your situation?
Chair, I'll be happy if we can proceed for an hour or two today, and if tomorrow we can finish before 12. Then I'm able to push the commitments that I have for tomorrow to afternoon.
Okay. Yes. Mr. Halley, I know you are stuck with me. So if I'm available, you are available.
We conjoined, unfortunately, or fortunately, as the case may be.
I think let's go up to 5. And then we will see whether at 5 we go up to 6 or we stop at 5 and adjourn until tomorrow. And then if we adjourn until tomorrow, we could start earlier than 10, if that suits everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Thank you. Well, let me ask this question as we move forward, Mr. Nhlego. You know, there has been this question of whether the so-called first report was the final report or the second or not. Yeah. Now, that question may be quite important for purposes of the concerns that you have raised. Because if it was not a final report, maybe it would follow from that the IPID, that the final report could differ from a report that is not final. And therefore, if there were differences between the two, that should not raise any alarms. Okay? Now, I think from your affidavit, I think you have taken the view that it was a final report, the first report. Is that correct?
Yes, that's very correct. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Now, one of the things that Mr. Kuba said when he gave evidence in the commission was that the first report was not a final report. And he said that was so because he said it was not a final report because there was still some investigation to be done when it was submitted. And as I recall, he said, although the cell phone records were there, they had not yet been analyzed by, I assume, an expert. And he said the differences between the first report and the final report, I don't know whether all of them or some of them, were based on the analysis of the cell phone records that had taken place. Now, I am aware that there is a memo which Mr. Musing, Advocate Musing from the NPA, wrote to Mr. Chauge of the NPA and to Ms. Jiba of the NPA, in which he also confirmed that the analysis of the cell phone records was outstanding. Are you aware of the same thing as well?
No, I am aware.
Yeah.
From the investigation report conducted by Vexman, that there is that aspect. In fact, I also accommodated it on to my statement,
yes,
which is more of an issue dealing with the process and the handling
yes,
of this particular matter between IPID and the
yes,
and the
yes,
NPA. And could I just allude to two things? Sorry, because the chair spoke to the question of what Mr. Kuba said, that this is the final report.
Yes, but before you do that, I just wanted to check before I proceed that okay, you are aware of this. We are on the same page. You are aware that Mr. Musing also said in some memo that the analysis of cell phone records was outstanding at the time the first report was submitted to them. You are aware of that?
Yes, I'm aware. I saw it in the investigation report.
Okay. Now, my question on this debate of whether the first report was final or not is therefore, how could it have been regarded as final if the work, the investigative work, had not been completed yet?
I would respond to that maybe in 2-3 different sort of ways. The first one, Chair, is that I think investigators who also did this work will shed more light on that question when they come in to testify. But I think just the few extracts that I made before this commission, the one thing that you can clearly see is that there is no additional information in the second report. Rather, something has been taken away from the first report. So I think for me that's very glaring. You have deleted paragraphs, deleted statements, and so on in the construction of the second one and so on. So I'm aware that somewhere in the investigation conducted by Vexman, that issue also was a matter around the question of, in fact, there are two things. The question of the cell phone records and warning statements.
The warning statements,
yes,
yeah.
Those are the things.
I leave out the warning statements because I take it the people concerned could not be forced to make them.
Yes.
But the cell phone record stands on a different footing.
Yeah.
So my question is, how could anybody regard the first report as final when the investigation had not been completed because there was still an analysis of the cell phone records that was to be done?
Oh, okay. Now, I don't want to claim any particular knowledge around specifically that area. Safe to say, Honorable Chair, that when that was done, my understanding is that you had two reports before the report of the January 22. You have a draft produced in October and a draft produced in November 2013. Now, I think the former acting executive director, Ms. Cooking Beck, would also shed some light around the question of that report of the 22nd, because she, by then, was the accounting officer. That's about almost 3 months before Mr. McBride came in March and so on. She would also shed light around the question of the finality of that report and what the arrangements were between IPID and the NPA, for an example. My understanding from what I hear is that she also was quite involved with that work of the investigation done by Mr. Kuba.
But would you agree that the report on the basis of which, together with the statements, you as minister would be expected to make a decision and the NPA would be expected to make its own decisions about criminal matters, would be the final report and not a report that was not final?
Yes, it would be the final report. Yes, I agree with that.
So therefore, to the extent that the first report may not have been a final report, you would not be expected to make your decision based on it. Now, when I talk about your decision, I'm talking about disciplinary matters, whether somebody must be charged or suspended and so on. I'm not suggesting that if you picked up that there was something that needed to be investigated, you couldn't say, let it be investigated. But I'm just saying you would accept that you would be expected to make your decisions on the basis of a final report, whichever it is, but it must be a final report.
No, that's correct.
Yeah,
I think that's a correct articulation.
Okay.
My contention only with regards to the first report, which I referred to as the final report, is that if the report was not final, what was it doing at the NPA? Well, it's not for the chair to respond. It's a rhetorical question. I'm just saying. So what was it? Why would the draft report be in the hands of the National Prosecuting Authority for them to decide to prosecute or not to prosecute, if it's a draft, if it was a draft?
Just give me the other, there's the other lever arch file that I can't remember what it is called, that Mr. Halley, you...
In relation to which, Mr. Chair?
Well, it's got my notes Have you seen that one? I just want us to speak with specifics. At the beginning, it's got some notes that I made, handwritten notes at the beginning. The files that were brought up yesterday, yeah. Right at the beginning, it's got my handwritten notes. While he's looking for the file that has got my notes, let me say this. Let me say two things to you, Mr. Ntlego, in regard to your rhetorical question.
Yes.
Mr. Kuba gave evidence here and said he was placed under tremendous pressure to submit his report to the NPA. I think one of the people that he said placed considerable pressure on him was General Ntlemeza, if I'm not mistaken. I think he said something like, you are delaying my move to the Hawks, or something like that. You know, when are you finishing the investigation? I'm paraphrasing.
Okay.
You know, but I think he also said Mr. Mosing also put a lot of pressure on him, and he even said normally a report like that must be signed by the executive director of IPID, but this one was submitted with his signature only. He might have said the acting executive director was not available or something, I'm not sure, but definitely he said there was a lot of pressure put on him to complete his investigation and submit his report. That's one. But two, I definitely have made a note. I saw a memo by Mr. Mosing addressed to Mr. Jiba, Miss Jiba, I'm sorry, Miss Jiba and Mr. Chauke within the NPA, in which he definitely said there are still outstanding, there's still something outstanding, and that is the analysis of the cell phone records. He may have actually said, this is not final. I'm not sure, I may be mistaken about that part, but I'm not mistaken about the part where he said the analysis of the cell phone records is outstanding. So now, if I'm correct factually that that's what Mr. Mosing said, I want to suggest to you that that must mean that the final, or rather the first report, was not the product of a complete investigation or a completed investigation. And if that was so, my logic suggests that it could not be a final report. Have you got something to say to this thinking?
No, I think that's an arguable point, Honorable Chair. You know, for starters, I wouldn't be privy to discussions between certain individuals. I know that the claim or allegation has been made, which I think it makes me very big. You know, that I must also have captured the National Prosecuting Authority and so on. Now, it's quite significant. But I'll deal with that point at another point, at a later point, Honorable Chair. But I'm saying I wouldn't be privy, for instance, to discussions either between Mr. Mosing, Moletsi, and Chauke, and whomever, except what I see in the reports, that indeed there were such things. I would also not be privy to the pressure points that Mr. Kuba must have been subjected to by whether it's the general clemens or any other individual and so on. I wouldn't know about those.
Yes.
Now, but I still do think that if Ms. Mbeki was to be called, I think she would shed more light about this issue of, so if the January 22 report was not final, so how come it followed a legislative sort of route to the NPA, for the NPA to make a decision? So if the report was not final, what was perhaps also the logical and relevant question related to that would be, what was the rush? If I may put it that way. So what would have been the rush if that report was not complete and then you took it to the National Prosecuting Authority and so on?
Yes.
And perhaps that's when the statements allegedly made by Mr. Kuba perhaps will also assist in determining the question of the finality of this particular report. But as things stand, my position is simple. That was the final report, and that's why it was with the NPA for prosecution. Now, and that's why even amongst other things, the NPA itself, besides the memo from Mosing to Chauke or to Ms. Jiba and so on, the matter was also even escalated to the level of the National Director of Public Prosecution then. So how could it get that far? I mean, if this is a draft report, and so it goes. So I think those are relevant questions.
No, I think you are right. Those questions are relevant. I'm going to read to you something, my own notes in regard to what Mr. Mosing said in the memo that I'm talking about. I can't locate the memo itself, but once I've read, maybe counsel will be able to locate it. I'm saying once I've read the relevant part, the quotations in my handwritten notes, maybe counsel will be able to tell us where it is in the bundle, but we might not need to go there for present purposes. But I want to say, I'm not sure what the position is with Ms. Mbeki, but you may be aware that when the IPID witnesses gave evidence here, or when Mr. Kuba gave evidence here, or even from his statements, he said that Ms. Mbeki told him not to involve Mr. Sissoko in this investigation, which he found strange because Mr. Sissoko was his supervisor. He was the person that he was reporting to for all investigations. He didn't understand why, in regard to this particular one, he should not involve Mr. Sissoko. That is one of the things that Mr. Kuba said to both Mr. Kuba, I think Mr. Kuba and Mr. McBride, but certainly Mr. Kuba, I think, he raised the question of the involvement of crime intelligence in this investigation. And now I may be mixing up Kuba and McBride, but one or more of them said crime intelligence doesn't get involved in investigations. That's not their job. Their job is different. But in this case, they had begun this investigation, and it was then handed over to us. And that was strange. That's what I was told. And then, of course, you have, according to Mr. Kuba, Ms. Mbeki saying, although you are going to investigate this, don't involve Mr. Sissoko, you know. So there are those things. But this is what I wrote here about the memorandum that I'm talking about.
Mr. Chair, could I be of some assistance?
Yes. It's dated 13 February 2014.
Correct.
Have you got it?
It's part of the Y7 bundle.
Just say where it is on the record,
It's-
but I will read from my note just for the record. You can
It's
say
page
where it is.
112, Y7.
Okay, all right. This is what I wrote here. The memo was also addressed to Mr. A. Chauke, the DPP for Southern Gauteng. The purpose of that memo is said to be, and I quote, to provide a summary of the facts and evidence in the matter for the Director of Public Prosecutions, South Gauteng, to be able to make an informed decision regarding the prosecution of the matter, close quotes. That is said to be the purpose of the memo by Mr. Mosing. And then I made a note here that says, the part of Mr. Kuba's version that says that the investigation had not been completed and that therefore the January 2014 report was not a final report seems to be corroborated by Mr. Mosing's memorandum of 13 February 2014. In paragraph 6.3 of his memo, Mr. Mosing said in part, when talking about his view, that Major General Sibia did not appear to have been involved. He said, and I quote, the cell phone evidence, however, does not corroborate his presence during the operations. This can be looked at again more closely after an expert has been procured to analyze the cell phone data. This could not be done by the time of writing this report, despite it being pointed out to the investigating team, close quotes. Right. So I just thought I would mention that that's what caught my attention as I was looking. But I'm not sure that there's anything you want to add on the issue of whether the first report was final or not. I think you have said what you wanted to say.
No, I think largely that's what I've done. But I also do think it will be to the benefit of this commission if Ms. Mbe was to be located and be brought. Now, for instance, in the investigation report by Vexman, they provided an explanation because they also engaged with Ms. Kuki as to this question of why Mr. Sissogo was not to be involved with Mr. Kuba in the construction of that first report. I think Ms. Mbeki, and I'm not going to be verbatim, but I'm just also paraphrasing in a sense, he was concerned about the fact that Mr. Sissogo had a criminal record, which he was still in the process of expunging from the system. And therefore his involvement, she felt that it was going to be challenged by the implicated persons, for instance, on the grounds of that criminal record and so on. Something to that effect. Look, as to what that means, really, I think it can then be further explored with her.
Yes.
As and when she deposes some information with this commission.
No, that's fine. I know that at some stage last year, I asked whether attempts had been made to make contact with Ms. Mbeki. I seem to understand that at some stage that I was told she also had tried to make contact with the commission, but I'm not sure
An affidavit has recently
where
come in
that
from
process
her.
is.
Apparently we've got the draft that she's prepared, but it has yet to be deposed to by her.
Yes, okay, all right. But just going back then to, from your side, you have said that you regarded the first report as final from your point of view.
Right.
And I think you did also say that, but you were not aware that was something still to be done. At that time, I think you said you were not aware, is that right, about the cell phone records analysis?
Okay, let me try and put it in context, Chair. When the matter arose of the illegal renditions of the Zimbabweans, there are a series of events leading up to the points of investigations. The first part is that the Civilian Secretariat of Police, they did some work, which was not necessarily investigative, but basically an analysis and overview of what were the issues. And if I'm not mistaken, that report made recommendations to the then Minister of Police, who wasn't me. And in the recommendation, in that report dealing with recommendations, they raised two things, that they recommended that either the Minister of Police then was to engage with the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development and agree on the appointment of a judge or a senior judge or retired judge, I think. But there was also reference to the DPCI judge, I think it must have been Judge Pillay at the time, that he could also be utilized for investigative work around the question of the allegations of the renditions of the Zimbabweans. The second recommendation, if I'm not mistaken, said the investigation could also be, because I think DPCI also did some investigation at some point. I mean, they were investigating themselves effectively, in a sense, that that investigation needed to be taken away from the police service. Okay, precisely because they were also implicated, I think. That's my assumption. And then give it to IPID, right, which I think was a correct position. So it does appear that the then minister, before he came in, took that position for that for this investigative work to be done by IPID, and that's when Mr. Kuba then gets assigned to actually conduct this investigation. I think there was, correctly so, I think there was also the involvement, I think somebody cited the fact that the crime intelligence was also somewhat involved to some extent and then pulled out at a later point. So you had all those kinds of processes. The third area was the criminal justice cluster itself. That also dealt with this particular issue of the renditions of the Zimbabweans. They even issued a statement to that effect and called upon an investigation to be conducted on this issue. And I think Advocate Mosing, in his interactions with the Vexman investigators, alluded to the mere fact that the then Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development also addressed senior management at the National Prosecuting Authority about the question of the illegal renditions of the Zimbabweans, and that something needed to be done. So I'm saying there were a series of these particular matters long before Mr. McBride came in and long before I also came in. Okay, so so you know, correctly so, anybody who comes in may tell me that I found these particular matters in process and I found them midstream and so forth. And that was basically it. So I'm just clarifying this area because it's also important to refer to context, in a sense, yes.
Yeah, no, that's all right. But would you agree with this proposition that if the first report was not based on a completed investigation, IPID was maybe not just entitled, but obliged to give you a report that is based on a completed investigation.
I'm trying to hear you, Honorable Chair.
I'm not sure what you were saying, but let me repeat what I'm saying.
No. I'm just saying I'm trying to hear you in terms of the point that you're making.
Yes, no, it's a question.
Okay.
Would you agree with the proposition that says, if the first report, namely that of the 22nd of January, was not based on a completed investigation, IPID was entitled, maybe was obliged actually, to give you a report that was based on a completed investigation?
In other words, it would have been a complete investigation. You wouldn't have a report that is sitting somewhere and, incomplete, and then have another one which is said to be complete to this end and so on. So my view would be that if a report is not complete, a report is not complete. So all you do, you continue further work to complete the report before you submit it to your principal.
Yes. I think that suggests that you would agree with that proposition.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Halley?
Can I also...
I'm sorry. Yes.
Because I think it's a matter that also arises, Honorable Chair, from some of the issues that you said. There is this assertion that investigators' reports are to be signed by an executive director of IPID. Now, there's no law that says that. There's no regulation that says that. In fact, there are other major reports that were major investigation reports, I'm sorry, needed to qualify that were conducted by IPID. So I'll cite largely two. There was a Mr. Angus, for an example, who conducted investigation around the issue of Keto Manor in Durban, the killings that were taking place there, and implicating the conduct of the police and so on. Now, there was no executive director that signed there. It was the chief investigator who signed and referred the report to the National Prosecuting Authority. Similarly, also with regards to Marikana, I'm told that Mr. Khamanyana, one of the implicated persons who must also appear here as a state capturer, he was commissioned to do work there. Now, that report was also not signed by an executive director, but it was signed off by a chief investigator and referred to the National Prosecuting Authority. So it's not a matter that would also be found anywhere in law or regulations, for an example, or IPID Act. In the work that Vexman did, they also interrogated this question. And Ms. Mbeki, Ms. Kukimpe, clarified this issue, that it is not so. But I'm raising this because the impression has been made that if a report by IPID is valid, it has got to be sanctioned and signed off by the executive director. That's not correct. So I'm raising it because the chair said something about it.
No, that's fine. Mr. Halley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The particular issue is dealt with extensively in the affidavits of Mr. Sandile July. I would prefer to deal with it in the context of his testimony. Understand that the witness has...
Which issue? Is that the question of who signs? Or the earlier question
the question of who signs or whether the report has to be signed by the executive director.
Okay.
That also depends on at what level the report has been, or the investigation has been conducted, whether it's a national investigation, provincial investigation. It's dependent upon the regulations that are applicable. Unfortunately, the regulations are not in the current bundle that we've handed up to you. It was a matter that was to be dealt with Mr. Chairman.
Well, to the extent that this witness has taken a position on that point, if, as evidence leader, you don't believe he is correct, at some stage before he leaves the witness stand, you'll need to come back to him.
We certainly will deal with it.
Yeah. Otherwise, he will have good enough reason to think you have no issue with his position.
Well, if I understand it, Mr. Msleko, would it be fair to say, insofar as that's concerned, you say there's no law that makes provision for that? Are you referring to the IPID Act? Or are you referring
well, maybe I should say the witness just came up with this issue when you may have been on a certain path. You can shelve his issue
Absolutely.
and deal with it at the right time, as long as before, at some stage tomorrow before he leaves,
Indeed,
you have raised it with him if you have an issue with it. But otherwise, you can stick to the path that you were on just before he raised that issue.
After the investigation had been completed by the Worksman's team, they submitted a report to you. The report was dated the 24th of April.
Yes, correct, sir.
But between the time that their terms of reference were given to them and the time of the completion of the report, which was the 24th of April, there would have been some interaction between you and Worksman's. Would that be correct?
No, what kind of interaction exactly? I mean, between the time when they started investigation and the time when they did what? Completed it?
Between the terms of reference, if my memory serves me correct, was the 25th of February of 2015.
Right.
And the report was completed on the 4th of April, sorry, the 24th of April of 2015. What I'm asking you is whether there was interaction in between that time.
I'm not sure whether between that time, but there was ongoing interaction. That's how I would put it. I wouldn't necessarily pin it down to a specific period. Sure. There was an ongoing interaction.
And the interaction that took place would have, amongst others, were there any reports that were being, interim reports that were being provided to you?
I can't recall whether there were interim reports, except that one of the issues I recall was when Mr. July raised what he thought was the lack of cooperation, for instance, on the side of Mr. Kuba. To which my reaction was basically, calling Mr. Kuba, and I said, look, these investigators, I had appointed them, please cooperate with the investigation, and that was it. But it's possible that there could have been other briefs, even if, when I refer to briefs, I need to qualify this because briefs by lawyers is something else. But briefs in the context of public roles as we played them, it could be a briefcase, and when somebody walks in and the briefs will take, this is where we are with the investigation or whatever, or any other process related thereto. So it's possible.
So you got a report back, at least one of the report backs to you was that Mr. Kuba or the IPID investigators were not cooperating. You then contacted Mr. Kuba.
No, let me correct you, Mr. Handy. I did not say IPID investigators. I spoke about Mr. Kuba.
Yes.
Now, there is a litany of investigators of IPID who are commissioned on a weekly basis. So I wouldn't say that they were not cooperating, because the issue in this instance was pertaining to the investigation report produced by Mr. Kuba.
Very well.
So I wanted to correct that, sir.
So, if I understand correctly, the report back to you was specifically that Mr. Kuba is incorporated.
I've responded, Chair.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
What I'd asked the witness earlier on, I was trying to understand what the report back from Worksmans was. So my earlier question was the report back that Mr. Kuba or the IPID investigators were not cooperated? I understand from the response that was given was that he was speaking specifically about Kuba. I just want to make it clear, I just want to understand, was the report back from Worksmans that Mr. Kuba specifically was incorporated?
Okay.
No, I responded to that question, Chair.
Okay.
So
Just respond again so that there is no doubt.
I responded that Mr. July reported to me that Mr. Kuba seemed not to have been cooperating with the investigation.
Was there any report in relation to the other two? That's Mr. McBride and Mr. Sissoko.
No, I don't remember anything except that, of course, at a later point when I was being briefed, whether at the conclusion of their report or towards the conclusion, I also can't recall, but people that had been interviewed and spoken to, they also included Mr. McBride, and a statement was taken in that regard. I think there was something simply to that effect.
Now, initially you got your PA to telephone Mr. Kuba. Would that be correct?
No, that's incorrect.
So your PA did not phone Mr. Kuba?
I don't know whether she did.
Well, if she did, and Mr. Kuba testified that she had phoned him on several occasions, if she did phone him, on whose instructions would she be acting?
I also wouldn't know really on whose instructions it would be.
In fact, sorry.
Look, even in the affidavit deposed by Mr. Kuba, he doesn't say that he was called several times. So I think there is a little bit of an exaggeration there. I mean, just
bear with me. But the point is, and I'll get to the reference shortly, the point is that if she did phone him, she would not have been acting on your instructions, according to you.
Look, I wouldn't know what people in my office and what they do and whom do they phone and say what to other people and so on. I mean, there's no way I would know.
Well, you may or may not remember whether, if she did phone, you had asked her to phone. I think the question is whether, if she phoned, she would have phoned because you asked her to, or you might say, I can't remember whether I'd asked her to, and it could be that she phoned without me asking her to. So what's your recollection around that?
No, I mean, why would I phone Mr. Kuba? What for?
Yeah.
Really? I mean, that's the point.
So
Look, the only call I remember is the one pertaining to a matter that was brought to my attention by Mr. July, the investigating person for Vexman, and that's basically it.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, so I see that claims are being made that I called Kuba. and I wanted him to come down to Cape Town.
Yes.
I mean, Cape Town is the other end of the world from Limpopo, and so on. So why would I want to do that? Really? This person, by the way, has got nothing to do with me because it's not a person that I supervised directly. Okay? It would be something else, for instance, if, and I would understand that let's take a person like Mr. McBride in his,
the executive
in
director.
in his position as the executive director of IPID, that indeed it's possible that I would summon him to meetings wherever, and so on, hours, and so on, it's all right. But an investigator
is,
really.
I haven't refreshed my memory on this. Is what you are saying that you would not have contacted Mr. Kuba at all, because if you wanted something relating to IPID, you talk to the executive director, or is the position that there is an occasion that you say you did call him, but not another occasion?
No, not at any other occasion.
In
fact, I do not know why, Honorable Chair, this thing is made an issue, because precisely it's a hearsay. I mean, somebody says my PA called him, and Kuba does not say that I called him. No,
Well,
and that's a difference.
well,
I mean, it would be something else if.
Well, let's talk about you and Mr. Kuba, because I seem to remember that Mr. Kuba testified that you called him. That's what I'm trying to clarify.
Okay.
Whether you are saying, yes, I did call him maybe once for a specific reason, but if he says, or if somebody says I called him on another occasion, that's what I'm denying. Or whether your position is, I never called Mr. Kuba for anything.
No, I had already clarified on the issue of calling Mr. Kuba that indeed I did.
Okay.
Once.
Okay. Only once.
Only once. And in fact, in his affidavit, that's what he says.
That's
he says,
what he talks about.
He received a call, a very brief call from me, and it was once.
Yeah, okay.
And then he refers then to this other person that he calls was my PA, who called him, because he does not even cite that person in the affidavit as to who it was, except to say that was my PA.
Yes, okay.
Who called him and said whatever.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, the relevant passage is in Exhibit Y4. It's the affidavit of Mr. Kuba, and it appears at page 25.
Does it say anything other than what Mr. Ntlego says, namely, Mr. Kuba talks about Mr. Ntlego calling him once? He doesn't talk about.
That is true. He recalls Mr. Ntlego personally calls him once.
Yeah.
As far as the PA is concerned, is several calls.
Oh, okay. And it's Mr. Kuba who says Mr. Ntlego's PA called him several times.
So he says the following. It's page 25 of that exhibit at paragraph 81. He says, shortly before Mr. McBride's suspension in March of 2015, I received a number of calls from the then Minister of Police, Minister Nathi Nhleko's personal assistant, who did not disclose her name. Safe to say that she was his personal assistant. She informed me that the Minister Nhleko wanted to see me. I informed her that I required the permission from the Executive Director of IPID, Mr. McBride, before I could do so. She phoned again and told me that Minister Nhleko wanted me to fly to Cape Town over the weekend and that he would cover the cost. I told her that it would make no difference whether the meeting took place during office hours or over the weekend, because as long as the meeting related to IPID business, the Executive Director had to know about it. On the following day, Minister Nhleko phoned me and told me to cooperate with Worksman's attorneys regarding the January and March 2014 reports. Now, there were several calls from her, according to Mr. Kuba. If we are to understand correctly, You say that you don't know what the staff within your office are doing. But what is clear is on your version and on Mr. Kuba's version, you did phone him.
He said you phoned him once.
Yes, you did phone him, but you phoned him once. That's clear. There's no doubt about that. That you're conceding to.
No, both myself and Mr. Kuba, we talk about the same thing.
Yeah.
Once. That's what happened. Now, Chair, I don't know why we are.
Hang on, Mr. Tlego. I think let's allow Mr. Halley to continue. Exactly what your concern is might be addressed in the next question.
No, I'm sure, Chair, that he's not, because he has already made this point.
Yeah.
The point he has made, which is also made in Kuba's affidavit, is that essentially this commission is talking about a faceless person. Kuba's affidavit says she did not disclose her name. So, Mr. Harley, why do you call her my PA? When my PA had a name.
I think the affidavit of Mr. Kuba, the passage that Mr. Harley read, said the minister's PA.
Yes.
Yeah.
But he says
that's
in
why
the
he's
affidavit.
saying your
No,
PA.
no, in the affidavit, Mr. Kuba himself, he then says she did not disclose her name.
Yes.
Okay. So the question arises, maybe to both Mr. Harley and Mr. Kuba. So the PA I had a name and a surname. So this commission, why is it going to talk about faceless people?
No, Mr.
Because the point is this.
No.
Okay.
These are some of the things that make us take long. Mr. Kuba, according to the passage that Mr. Harley read, said that the person who called her said she was, or he was, I can't remember whether it was a he or she, was the minister's PA, but did not disclose her name.
Right.
So you have confirmed to Mr. Harley that you did call Mr. Kuba once, and you have said that Mr. Kuba also talks about one occasion when you called him. He then talks about these other calls from the person that he understood or was told was your PA. I think Mr. Harley must then come up with the next question, and then you answer that. Let's make progress. Let's hear what the next question is.
No, I accept the Chair. Yes. Thanks very much.
Chair, maybe before he continues, before he answers, I don't know if Mr. Harley wants to really take this issue of a call that Kuba says was made by somebody else to him, because if he wants to take it further, he should also give the witness the benefit of what Kuba is said to have told McBride about the same issue.
Yes, okay.
Because we have that very same issue in McBride's statement at paragraph 30, where McBride says that Kuba told him something different in respect of the same thing. Maybe for his benefit, I can just read it out. Then he can decide whether to what extent he wants to take it further.
I think that's why I was saying Mr. Cleo must wait for the next question, because depending what that question is, it might include what you are talking about.
Yes, indeed.
But we are at 2 minutes to 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm not sure whether it's convenient to wrap it up, because I think we must stop at 5. Wrap it up at this stage, or you want to put your next question, and then once we've got the answer, we adjourn.
Yes. Well, I think because it seems that something, a little bit more might come out of this, but what I want to deal with just to allay or to deal with one concern that has been raised by Mr. Nhleko relating to this so-called faceless person. That's not what Mr. Kuba is saying. He's not identifying her as a faceless person. He's saying a specific person. If I tell you that I spoke to a person who identified herself as your wife, now unless you've got several thousand wives, then it becomes difficult, of course. But if you've only got one wife, it's easy to know who that person is. You go back to her and you speak to her, she'll then tell you, actually, that's not true. But you can then say to us, as far as your affidavit or your response is concerned, I know the person that he's referring to, the person is Miss, and tell us who that person is, and say, I have not been able to get hold of her because for the last 3 or 4 years, I have not been in the ministry. I don't know what has become of her, or something to that effect. You telling us that this is a faceless person. You know the face of your PA. Presumably you had a PA, is that correct? Is that correct?
No, I've already attested to that, Mr. Hali. But look, the example you just made is the most simplistic kind of an example and does not apply in institutions of governance.
Okay.
In formal institutions, if I pick up a call and I'm calling Mr. Hali, right? I would say, Mr. Hali, is that Mr. Hali? And Mr. Hali says, yes, it is me. Say, Mr. Hali, we are speaking to Kosnatipo and Kostamsangatle, right? Whatever my function is and so forth. I'm calling you, let's say now, PA, I'm calling you on behalf of Mr. Mukari. Okay, I'm working for Mr. Mukari, and Mr. Mukari instructs me that you are this, that, and so on.
Mr. Ntlego, as I understand your position,
yes, sir.
You did not instruct your secretary or your PA to call Mr. Kuba.
Correct.
Why are you bothering to go into that? Because once you say, I did not instruct her, and if she said to Mr. Kuba that if she phoned Mr. Kuba in the first place several times and said that she was, if that was my PA phoning, she was doing so without my knowledge. Yeah. That should be all you should be really interested in. Then we can move on.
No, I accept the chair, but your angling is quite different from how Mr. Hali wants to take up this issue.
Yes.
And that's why I have a problem. And the problem has nothing to do with you, Chair, but problem in terms of the manner in which he's angling into this thing. You know, it's as if indeed I must have instructed my PA to do this and so on. And I'm saying, no, that can't be correct.
Mr. Ntlego has said if his PA did phone Mr. Kuba, it was not because he had asked her to do so, but he knows that he phoned him once. Mr. Kuba accepts that he phoned him once. Maybe this is the right time to adjourn, or?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is that fine?
That's fine.
There's not a question that you wanted to.
Well, I do want to ask further questions related to the very issue around the Cape.
And then we wrap up.
But if you don't mind.
Yeah, we can say another 2, 3, 5 minutes. That's
Thank
fine.
you, Mr. Chair.
And then we stop.
Chair, would you like me to read that paragraph? I think it will resolve the whole thing.
Okay, read it, Mr. Mukari.
Well, this is the McBride's affidavit.
Don't be far from your mic.
My thing is written as RJM 006.
Don't be far from your mic.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So on the same issue, Mr. McBride writes as follows. Paragraph 30 says, Kuba reported having received multiple calls from Nhleko's personal assistant asking him to meet with Nhleko for a face-to-face meeting. Then he proceeds, he says, Nhleko himself called Kuba promising him that the ministry will cover his traveling costs to Cape Town on a weekend so that I would not find out about it. So Kuba has told this commissioner's affidavit and McBride two different things. So that will resolve it.
Okay.
Well, with respect, I'm not sure that that does resolve it at all, because obviously two witnesses may have a different recollection of things. I don't want to debate that issue.
Yes.
The witness.
Yes.
That's a matter that Mr. Mukari, of course, would be at liberty to raise and to argue.
Yes, maybe what we should do, maybe we should adjourn. You also get a chance to look at the whole thing. So when we come back tomorrow, you might wrap it up in a certain way.
Thank you, Mr.
But I think let us stop. Tomorrow we should start earlier than 10 if we can. I think we should start at 9:30. Would that be fine with everybody?
That will be fine, Chair.
That will be fine. I'm sure it's fine with you, Mr. Nhleko.
No, I'm good. Thanks.
I'm going to put a deadline for us to finish with Mr. Nhleko tomorrow.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
We must aim to finish with him within 2 hours.
That's perfectly in order. Of
So
course,
if
it's
we start
subject.
at 9:30, I'm saying we must finish with him within 2 hours. That excludes re-examination. So I'm not including re-examination on that, but from the point of view of the evidence leader and myself.
Chair, I'm very happy with that timeline because I don't anticipate the re-examination to be more than 30 minutes.
Yes, okay, no, thank you. So tomorrow, Mr. Hadley, you look at what is really important and we deal with that tomorrow. Within 2 hours, I want us to finish with him so that we can move on to other matters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you to you, Mr. Nhleko, and to Mr. Mukari for all your cooperation so that we can try and wrap this up tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
So we'll adjourn, and then tomorrow we'll start at 9:30. We adjourn.
Thanks.